The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. So, another whole week has gone by already, and here we are sitting across from each other again.
I know. You're a lucky girl, aren't you?
I know. It's the only time during the week that I really get a good look at you.
Well, I mean, you must still like what you see. We haven't put a separator in between us yet.
No.
So it looks like we're recording in separate booths.
Nope, I can see it all.
Well, with that said, I think we're going to skip the housekeeping this week because it's been raining all weekend. And I'd like to get out for a walk to the old Plattsburgh Air Force Base and head on over to the Old Post Cemetery. There's a lot of cool graves there.
It is a cool place, and we're excited about our stories for tonight, so why don't we just get into it?
Works for me. So with that said, why don't you tell all our fellow wanderers where your mind wandered for this episode?
It actually wandered out into the desert, and it took a while to get back from the desert, but here I am, ready to go.
You want some water before you start?
No, that's all right.
You parched?
I'm good. A little parched. I'm good, though. So when you come upon the white dome rising up from the sandy soil of the Mojave Desert, not far from Landers, California, you can't help but be amazed by it. Maybe that's because it's so very white against the desert backdrop. Or maybe it's the size. The dome is 38 feet high and 55 feet in diameter. Or maybe it's the construction materials. The entire dome is made of wood. For decades, the dome was used as a sound bath and more recently as a recording studio. The wooden dome interior is beautiful and sound reverberates in amazing ways inside of it. But that wasn't what the dome was initially meant to do. From the outside, you might notice some oddities, like the 64 protruding aluminum die rods that poke out at precise intervals all around the dome top. What purpose did they have? Well, if those die rods spin as they were intended to, they would produce 50,000 volts of electrostatic energy. Why would anyone want to produce 50,000 volts of electrostatic energy out in the desert? Well, according to the dome's builder, George Van Tassel, it would result in negative ion-producing cell regeneration. In other words, people's lives could be prolonged. But that's not all. Van Tassel also believed it could produce anti-gravity and time travel. He called it the Integratron, and according to him, the instructions were given to him by aliens from Venus. Now, before you laugh or pass this off as some wacky guy who was out in the desert too long, I want you to know a little about George Van Tassel. He was born in 1910 in Ohio and graduated from high school by the 10th grade. He worked at a municipal airport and obtained his pilot's license before the age of 20. He moved to California and secured a job as a car mechanic at his uncle's shop, where he met Frank Kritzer. Kritzer was a bit of an eccentric, and he told Van Tassel about the mining operation he was hoping to start near Giant Rock, a 7-story tall boulder near Landers. Van Tassel loaned him the $30 to buy his mining equipment. Kritzer used the equipment, in part, to dig out a 400-square-foot home for himself beneath Giant Rock. In the decade plus between 1930 and 1947, Van Tassel worked as a tool and die maker for Douglas Aircraft before moving up to the rank of Chief Flight Inspector at Hughes Aircraft, the company of Howard Hughes. Van Tassel and Hughes were old friends, since Van Tassel had also done some time as a test pilot for Hughes earlier on. Now, Van Tassel's old friend, Frank Kritzer, had a bit of an unknown past. Some said he was simply a German immigrant who came to the U.S. during World War II, but birth records showed that he was born in the U.S. Either way, people began whispering that he was actually a German spy because he had a radio antenna installed on top of Giant Rock. Kritzer was simply a radio enthusiast, but suspicion was high in 1942. The rumors and suspicion were so bad that police actually raided his home in 1942. Although the exact cause of the dynamite explosion is unknown, the persistent rumor was that Kritzer committed suicide. Another rumor was that one of the tear gas canisters that the police had tossed into his underground home accidentally ignited his store of dynamite. Van Tassel was devastated by Kritzer's death. But he soon leased an airstrip near Giant Rock from the U.S. military and obtained a government contract to maintain the airstrip and develop the surrounding area. He and his family, wife Ava and their 3 daughters, moved out to the site, initially living in tents and at some point in Kritzer's abandoned underground home. Initially, Van Tassel enjoyed Giant Rock just like the indigenous people had for thousands of years, as a sacred site. He would sit for hours just watching the shadows the rock cast across the desert floor. He started holding meditation meetings under the rock in 1953. He built a new home, a gas station, a cafe, and a guest ranch next to the rock. And then August 24th, 1953 happened. Van Tassel was 43 years old at the time. According to a 1964 interview he did with Jack Webster, which was on TV, it was around 2 a.m. when something woke him up. He walked out to the airstrip and saw a bell-shaped craft. Since both the military and private citizens used the airstrip, there were other employees out there at the time who witnessed this bell-shaped craft as well. He described the craft as 36 feet in diameter and 19 feet tall, and it was hovering about 10 feet off the ground. And then a man, about 5'6", approached him. And when Van Tassel asked what he wanted, the man replied that he wanted to show him his ship. Now, interviewer Jack Webster asked several questions, and Van Tassel calmly explained everything. He said that it was a man because he looked like a human man. He said that he spoke perfect English and that his name was Solganda. Van Tassel and Solganda stood beneath the hovering craft and then were beamed up into it. Webster got a pretty good chuckle out of this and asked what he meant. And Van Tassel, again very calmly, replied that it was like being on a slow elevator. Once inside the bell-shaped craft, Van Tassel said he could see vertical instruments labeled in some sort of hieroglyphics. The interior was about 18 feet in diameter, and 3 other men were seated inside. They all stood about 5 foot 6 inches tall, and they all appeared quite young. Van Tassel claimed Solganda looked about 28 years old, but he claimed to be 700. During their interaction, Solganda told him several things. First, that humans' reliance on metal objects, especially as building materials, was interfering with radio frequencies, which, in turn, was cutting off interplanetary thought transfers. Second, he told him that humankind's other problem was that by the time they learned everything they needed to know, it was too late. They were at the end of their lives, and their knowledge died with them.
That's so true.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Gonda felt that prolonging human life was essential. He told Van Tassel the formula for time travel. It was simply F equals 1 over T. F was for frequency, and T was for time. And that was that, basically. So I have to take a minute and say that if you want to watch the interview between Jack Webster and Van Tassel yourself, I did include the link in our show notes. And it's really fascinating to watch. I want to say it's maybe 26 minutes. But the reason it's so fascinating, at least to me, was that Van Tassel comes across as both completely unflappable and highly educated. And he answers every single one of Webster's questions with a calm sort of ease about him. And it just really shows that despite sounding unbelievable, some of the things that he said, it truly isn't to him because he believes it actually happened. So Van Tassel goes on to explain that they tested this time travel theory of F equals 1 over T. But they tested it on a smaller scale in Santa Monica. And he had a colleague named Charles Arts manipulate this third dimension that can affect magnetic fields. He was able to transmit television programs onto a television that had no antenna. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, except that they were television programs that were run on stations that no longer existed. When Webster asked why this wasn't worldwide public knowledge that they had accomplished this, Van Tassel explained that the U.S. military had come in and confiscated all of their research and evidence right after they completed it. Which also sounds plausible.
Oh, it most certainly does.
Yeah. So, a year after Van Tassel's visit with Solganda in 1954, he began constructing the Integratron, the White Dome, about 3 miles from Giant Rock. His reason for doing so was that he wanted to conduct experiments in cell rejuvenation, anti-gravity, and time travel. By 1958, he had the circular wooden 2-story structure built. Inside, it is quite beautiful. It looks like cathedral domes from ancient Rome, although it's entirely made of exposed wood, which in some ways makes it even more beautiful, especially when you consider that it was built without a single nail, screw, or weather stripping. According to a New York Times article, you enter the Integratron through double doors on its south side. You climb a small stairway to the ground floor and then up to the second floor, where 16 rectangular windows give you a 360-degree view of the desert. Entirely made of old-growth Douglas fir, the only concrete the dome has in it is the slab that it sits on. But if you make a sound, that's when the Integratron really shows its beauty. The wood acts as a natural amplifier, and the curvilinear dome provides perfect surround sound that is an acoustic dream. Van Tassel also came up with the idea of making it the centerpiece of a 10-acre compound he called the College of Universal Wisdom. 8 other structures rounded out the property, including a utilities building, an underground humidity control room, workshop sheds, and a bipolar magnetic detector. As he continued to practice meditation, he claimed to have thought transference, which he referred to as the omnibeam, from dozens of other space people, according to a Los Angeles magazine article. He also began holding annual interplanetary spacecraft conventions, which were some of the first large gatherings of ufologists in the entire United States. Unfortunately, Van Tassel's unexpected death in 1978 meant that he was never able to finish the Integratron as it was meant to be. The final mechanics that needed to be added to turn it into a working electrostatic chamber or a time machine were never completed. And, of course, people are going to try and debunk his alien visitor story. Some point out that Van Tassel was part of Howard Hughes's team that built the D-2, a precursor to the Spruce Goose, and that the airplane and the dome are very similar. Others latch on to the fact that Van Tassel himself admitted he was studying the works of Nikola Tesla, and that the die rods on the dome were just one of Tesla's ideas. Others point out that since his airstrip was used by the U.S. military, that he really did just talk to regular human men in 1953. But so what if he did? They were still operating a craft that was unlike anything else we had in 1953. And he also built something extraordinary that has stood the test of time. In the almost 50 years since his death, the Integratron has been used as a sound bath for people who come from all over the world to experience it, as well as a recording studio where bands like the Arctic Monkeys have recorded. So it may not work as a time machine, but it's definitely a very cool sound bath kind of place.
Yeah, I don't even care so much about his UFO encounter in this one. It sounds like if he would have lived long enough and completed this project of his, who knows what it would have produced.
Right, especially if he was looking at Tesla's research and things like that. Doesn't matter whether it came from some alien from Venus or not.
Right. And I love Tesla. It's like they say, though, like the aliens said, if the supposed aliens that spoke to him, it's just a waste. You get to that age and all that knowledge is gone.
Right. And I like the idea of saying that all the metal that we do all of our building out of and it's interfering with interplanetary thought transference, that if we took all that stuff down and continued to build with wood and made our structures smaller, you'd have the ability to reach out to the universe more. It's an intriguing theory.
Yeah, that it is. And I could actually see where there'd be some truth to it.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting. And it'd be a cool place to go to.
And I got to say, Tesla is one of those people that I would love to be able to sit down and pick his brain.
If he would let you. He was a pretty ornery character from what I've read and heard, but yeah.
Yeah, that he was.
Yeah.
Well, it was really cool.
Yeah. And the Mojave Desert is a hot spot for UFOs, by the way. I just thought I'd throw that in too. So it's possible that, I don't know, it's all possible. Who knows?
And we'll be back right after this quick break.
Hey, did you know? For people who have imagined how simple space travel could be if we could just get on an elevator, they may not have to simply imagine for much longer. The Obayashi Corporation from Japan plans to have their space elevator installed by the year 2050. A 60,000-mile-long nanotube tethering the Earth at the equator to a geostationary satellite would allow both payloads and people to travel 93 miles per hour, making the trip to the International Space Station just 2.5 hours long. A space elevator ride to Mars would take just 40 days. Can that really be done? They certainly think so. Who'da thunk it? Okay, we're back. So, where did your mind wander this week?
Well, for some odd reason, this iconic woman has been showing up on my Facebook feed a lot lately, and it kind of transported me back in time a bit. So I thought, why not do a story on her? I'm sure many young guys and gals out there have had a bit of a crush on her over the years. I mean, who doesn't love Cassandra Peterson, otherwise known as Elvira, Mistress of the Dark? Elvira is still an icon, with her heaven-bump jet black hairstyle and skin-tight, low-cut black dress with the thigh-high slit in it. She even hosted Elvira's Movie Macabre every week from 1981 to 1986. Featuring B-movies, Elvira often interjected with comments and jokes. Her character was so popular that she starred in 2 movies, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, which came out in 1988, and Elvira's Haunted Hills, which came out in 2004. She's done several incarnations of the horror movie hostess format over the years, one back in 2014, and one as recently as 2021. But Cassandra Peterson, the woman behind the Elvira persona, is much more than just the queen of camp. She was born in 1951 in Manhattan, Kansas, and by her teenage years, she was working as a go-go dancer at various nightclubs and gay bars, as well as performing at variety shows for soldiers at Fort Carson. At the age of 17, she was dancing in Las Vegas at the Dunes, which was a hotel, country club, and casino. She even met Elvis Presley there and went on a date with him. In 1971, she had a small role in the James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever. Then she moved to Italy, where she was part of 2 different rock bands, I Latins 80 and the Snails. Movie director Federico Fellini gave her a small role in the 1972 film Roma. A year later, she was back in the U.S., working at the Playboy Mansion as a hostess and model. By 1979, she was a member of the Groundlings, the famous LA improv group, where she became friends with Paul Rubens, otherwise known as Pee Wee Herman. She tried out for, and was called back for, the role of Ginger on a remake of Gilligan's Island in 1983, but she ended up not getting the part. But that's okay, because KHJ-TV offered her the role that she's famous for, the hostess of a B-movie television show, Elvira's Movie Macabre. Now, I think everyone between the ages of 20 and 80 knows who Elvira is. It would be completely expected for someone like Elvira to live in a haunted house. But what you may not know is that Cassandra Peterson actually did. It was back in 1989, and Peterson was simply out walking her dogs in the Los Feliz area of Hollywood Hills when she came upon a house that spoke to her. No, it wasn't some decrepit old Victorian mansion painted black with widow's walks and rickety balconies. It was nothing like that. The home was Briarcliff Manor, a 2.5-story, beautiful craftsman-style estate. Built in 1911, the home looks like something Frank Lloyd Wright might have built, although he didn't. The 6,692 square foot home has shingle siding and a low-pitched gabled roof with overhanging eaves and exposed wood rafters. The exterior of the house is lovely Unfortunately, at first, I couldn't find a single interior photograph of the house, but I imagined it would have had a stone fireplace or two, since it has 2 chimneys, and lots of exposed beams. Then, I happened upon one photo of the interior from the year 1919, and I was kind of right. The photo does show a massive stone fireplace, but there were no exposed beams. There are upwards of 15 pairs of antlers mounted on the wall, as well as about 7 different bearskin rugs on the floor. But keep in mind, it was 1919, and at that point, the home was owned by Thomas Thorkildsen, the Borax King, but I'll get to him a little bit later on. When Cassandra Peterson walked past Briarcliff Manor in 1989, she knew right away that she had to buy it. It was just 5,600 square feet back then, and it had 21 rooms. Although, to be fair, some accounts say that it had 29 rooms at the time. Regardless, things quickly turned ghostly as soon as she and her then-husband, film producer Mark Pearson, moved in. According to thethings.com, weird stuff started happening before the couple even had a chance to unpack. Peterson hadn't really explored the 3rd floor of the house, and so as the movers brought in the furniture and boxes, she asked them to leave everything on the first 2 floors. As she unpacked the boxes in a room on the 2nd floor, she could hear the movers upstairs, clomping around in heavy boots, and then moving furniture around. Annoyed that they hadn't listened to her, she ran up the stairs and started to say, "Hey, I told you guys not to." And then, before she could even finish her sentence, she realized that she was standing in a completely empty room. There wasn't a soul up there, and not a single piece of furniture. And that was just the start, according to denofgeek.com. Peterson says that she actually saw several apparitions, including a group of men in old-fashioned clothes standing by the fireplace, and a well-dressed gentleman sitting by the fire who also walked in and out of her bedroom. She also encountered a nurse dressed in a uniform from the 1930s as well. Each time that she saw these apparitions, they appeared to be solid, not see-through, and Peterson actually spoke to them. Now, I imagine she asked the strangers, what in the hell were they doing in her house? But they all vanished right in front of her eyes. The nurse that she says she saw was particularly creepy, since Peterson clearly heard her say that she was going to take Peterson's husband into the pool. Den of Geek website also goes on to say that Peterson discovered that there were a few deaths in the house, including a Ziegfeld Follies girl who actually died in the pool. Now, if that's not creepy enough, the creep factor even goes up a bit more when Peterson mentions that she actually saw a body floating in her pool one day, and it vanished right in front of her eyes as well. But it was Luke Skywalker himself who really added more to the story. Well, specifically actor Mark Hamill, who came to a dinner party thrown by Peterson and Pearson. When Hamill arrived at the house, he was in awe, saying that he couldn't believe he was back in the house that he once lived in during the 60s. Although there's no record of him talking about it publicly, at least not that I could find, he allegedly told Peterson that one of his former housemates had committed suicide in the home. When Peterson asked where, he said it was in the master bedroom closet. The ghostly events were so common and happening so regularly that it got to the point where Peterson wasn't sure that she wanted to live in the house anymore. As a last-ditch effort, before selling the house, the couple asked a priest to come in and perform an exorcism. But I imagine it didn't work because they decided to sell the house in 1994 to another famous celebrity. But before I get into who bought the home, we should probably look at who owned it back at the very beginning. The house was originally built in 1911 for oil baron Louis Aaron McRae. Now, I gotta say that I spent a good half hour to 45 minutes looking for any information I could find on him, but I couldn't find a darn thing. But since he owned the house for less than a year before selling it to Thomas Thorkildsen, it may not matter all that much, especially since Thorkildsen, otherwise known as the Borax King, seemed to be quite the character. Thorkildsen had a long career in the borax mining business in the late 1800s. Borax, or calcium borate, has been used as a cleaning agent for centuries. Before that, the ancient Egyptians used it as part of their mummifying process. According to a LA Times article, he was caught backdating orders for his friends, and when his boss threatened to fire him, Thorkildsen resigned and sunk the $17,000 that he had saved into purchasing his own mine in Ventura County. Apparently, allowing his employees to transport borax while drunk didn't hurt his profits, and he purchased a second mine. This one was in the Santa Clarita Valley in 1905. It cost $80,000, and he quickly became a millionaire. When another miner illegally staked claims on his land, Thorkildsen actually drew a pistol and chased him off his land. In 1908, he was just 39 years old, and he had already earned the Borax King nickname. He married Dora Garinger, a mining camp cook from Death Valley, who had already been divorced twice. Thorkildsen and Dora owned several homes. I mean, why wouldn't he, with a nickname like the Borax King? Plus, his former boss ended up paying him $1.8 million just to buy him out of the company. How that happened, I don't know, but Thorkildsen was a very, very wealthy man, since he basically had a monopoly on the borax market. But when his marriage ended, Dora kept the house in Beverly Hills, and Thorkildsen bought Briarcliff Manor in 1916 for $70,000. He did a few renovations to the craftsman-style home, like adding a grotto made out of borax ore, a heart-shaped swimming pool, and a ballroom that looked like a 17th century hall right out of a medieval castle. He held extremely lavish parties, where he liked to walk around in the nude. And this is most likely when the woman employed as a Ziegfeld Follies dancer was found in his pool. She apparently drowned, but no one noticed her until the following morning. Now, her apparition just might be who Cassandra Peterson saw floating in the pool, or it could be the man Thorkildsen found with his ex-wife. Thorkildsen and Dora reconciled for a bit, but when he found her in bed with another man, he chased the guy off the property. When he returned to the house, he found the man mysteriously floating in the pool. The story was that the man had doubled back to get his clothes, slipped, hit his head, and also drowned. It was a huge scandal back then, which Thorkildsen reacted to by buying a yacht, filling it with random beautiful women, and setting sail. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, the borax mine was already on its last legs. And Thorkildsen, well, he lost everything, including his homes. So, are any of the apparitions in Briarcliff Manor Thorkildsen himself? Well, quite possibly. But Cassandra Peterson didn't really want to find out. She sold Briarcliff Manor in 1994 to a young man named Brad Pitt. Peterson has said in many interviews that she was upfront with Pitt about the house being haunted, but that he wasn't put off by it at all. Brad Pitt is a known architecture buff, and he fell in love with the property just as quickly as she had. He loved it so much that he paid $1.7 million for it. That's a lot of money, considering that he had just finished filming Thelma and Louise at the time. Over the 20 years that Pitt owned Briarcliff Manor, he added acreage and several amenities, including a tennis court and a skating rink. But he's been totally silent on any hauntings. he's never publicly mentioned any ghostly going-ons in the home. Now, that doesn't mean that there hasn't been any. It just means that he's never talked about it in any of the interviews, or perhaps he was just never asked. Just last year in 2023, Pitt sold Briarcliff Manor for $33 million to Eileen Getty. Now, if that name sounds familiar to all of you, that's because Getty is the granddaughter of oil magnate J. Paul Getty. So, that seems kind of fitting, right? Briarcliff Manor was built for an oil baron over 100 years ago and now belongs to the heiress of another oil tycoon. Since the recent purchase, there's been no word on whether the spirits at Briarcliff Manor are happy about that or not. I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, that's kind of cool that it started out being built for an oil baron and then it ended up being bought by the heiress of an oil fortune. It's like it came full circle almost.
Yeah, and $33 million, that's a good chunk of change, and it's coming from old money.
Right. I wonder if the house can, sense that, it's almost like it's somebody that belongs there.
A kindred spirit?
Yeah.
Perhaps so.
Yeah. And, the thing about Elvira, too, is she doesn't age. She looks exactly the same way she's always looked. It's pretty amazing. She looks pretty darn good.
Yeah, it's like she's tapped into some kind of anti-aging secret.
I know. Maybe it's wearing the big wig and the the long black dress with the slit up the front. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, if you'd like to know more about the episode, Beth, you want to tell them about the sources?
Yeah, so as always, if you'd like to know more about Briarcliff Manor or about the Integratron, you can always check our sources in our show notes. There's a lot more there to read if you are inclined to do so.
Yeah, and if you check out our Facebook page, Beth always posts on Tuesday what the upcoming episode is going to be about. And there'll be pictures there of Briarcliff Manor and the Integratron?
Integratron, yes.
So check us out on Facebook.
Yeah.
Well, with that said, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode.
I think so.
Join us next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.